Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Friday, the 21st of November. I'm Caroline Hepker here in London. Coming up today, global stocks tumble back to earth as Nvidia's rosy outlook fails to ease AI bubble angst. Japan's leader Sanae Takaichi unveils plans for an economic cash injection of $112 billion. Plus, UEFA scores big with a new €2.5 billion football rights deal as Paramount's Skydance leaves rivals offside. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Stocks are poised for their worst week in 7 months as fears of an artificial intelligence bubble persist. The MSCI All Country World Index has slumped almost 3% this week, putting it on track for its sharpest weekly drop since April. The moves wipe out earlier gains after Nvidia's strong earnings report failed to soothe investor concerns about lofty valuations. Paul Dobson is Bloomberg's Asia Markets executive editor.
Nobody really knows exactly what the trigger was, but I think that we have some sense of why it happened. And that is still those concerns, not so much about how much money Nvidia is going to raise from selling all of its chips, but how exactly it's arranging the sales and whether the buyers are going to actually be able to then viably pay for it all and turn a profit on their investments.
Paul Dobson speaking there as the pullback pushes the S&P 500 towards its worst November since 2008. To Asia now, where the Japanese yen has held steady against the US dollar after the cabinet of Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi approved the largest round of extra spending since the pandemic. Her stimulus package will include $112 billion in new spending, with the bulk of the measures aimed at price relief designed to address voters' frustrations over inflation. The announcement comes as Japan issued the country's strongest warning yet over recent movements in the yen. Speaking to reporters, the country's finance minister specifically mentioned intervention as an option as she tried, with only limited impact, to stem falls in the currency. Ukraine's allies have reacted negatively to a US-Russian peace plan that grants Moscow many of its key demands. Under the proposal, Ukraine would be forced to cede large chunks of territory, cap the size of its military, and give up hopes of NATO membership. In return, the country would receive a US security guarantee that Washington would be compensated for. President Zelensky says that he's agreed to work on the peace plan and will meet with President Trump in the coming days to discuss the details. His words are spoken by a translator.
Ukraine needs peace, and Ukraine will do everything to ensure that no one in the world can say that we are undermining diplomacy. This is important.
President Zelensky speaking there via a translator as the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis told Bloomberg's editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite that he believes a lot of the US proposals and the proposals overall are, quote, quite problematic. Now, Germany is pressing the European Union to give the UK access to its €150 billion defence fund. The EU is demanding that Britain contribute €2 billion, which is well above its initial offer of a few hundred million. But Germany wants both sides to reach a compromise ahead of the November 30th deadline to apply for funds. And here in the UK, a closely watched consumer confidence survey has fallen on every measure. The news comes ahead of the Labour government's budget announcement next week, which is expected to include a range of tax hikes. Our chief UK economist, Dan Hansen, says that British consumers will likely alter their behaviour in response to the changes.
You can look at it now and say, well, if I put, capital gains tax, I put that up by 1 percentage point. That currently raises X, well, I could get a little bit more money. But what actually happens is that people look at that and move their money elsewhere, and the tax base is very mobile. So if you have a lot of small measures with that risk attached, you end up in a world where you struggle to raise the money. There's just a lot more uncertainty.
Dan Hansen speaking there about the idea of multiple taxes being raised in the UK budget next week and what might be the reaction. Now, research company GfK says that its overall confidence level fell 2 points in November to an index score of minus 19 in terms of UK consumer confidence. A further study found that Brexit has caused almost twice as much damage to the UK economy as initially thought. The research, which has been presented to the Office for Budget Responsibility, shows that the departure from the EU has lost the country between 180 and 240 billion pounds over the last decade. And lastly, football's European governing body has managed to achieve a steep increase in the value of its media rights. The revenue boost will be seen as a success for the organisation and its competitions. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
A US broadcaster has won television rights for the most Champions League matches, Europe's top-flight football competition. It's a first international push for Paramount Skydance, who agreed the deal following an altered bidding process for the showpiece tournament, geared towards boosting its appeal to streamers. The firm is owned by David Ellison, whose father Larry Ellison co-founded US technology company Oracle. Bloomberg understands UEFA will receive €2.5 billion a year for the next cycle, which runs from 2027 to 2031. That's up from about €2 billion in the last round. This year's tender process was the first conducted on UEFA's behalf by US-owned agency Relevant Football Partners and UC3, the commercial arm of UEFA and the European football clubs. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are our top stories today. Looking at the markets right now, the Kospi is currently slumping 3.7% lower. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down by 1.6%, and the All Country World Index dropping 0.25% this morning. Stock futures are also lower for Europe. If we look at the US Stocks 50 futures this hour, they're down by 1.5%. US stock futures are just about in the green. That reflects the different closes that we had yesterday. So actually European stocks closed up 0.4. US stocks slumped at the end of the day on Thursday. The Japanese yen is climbing. Bitcoin really struggling this week, currently trading just above $85,000. Brent crude futures are also weaker, 1.1%, and 10-year treasuries flat, the yield at 4.09%. So those are the markets. In a moment, we're going to bring you the latest on that big stock market reversal, as well as Japan's massive stimulus plans. But another story has really caught my eye this morning. I wonder whether you're getting ready for the Ashes. Of course, this is the oldest contest in cricket. It's 5 test matches, up to 5 days each. And of course, it takes place between Australia and England. Bloomberg's Adam Blenford has been writing about this. Why? Because he's been looking at the rise of unruly sports fans, or whether it really has been a rise, whether it's different now than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Look, he does a beautiful job of talking about the fierce rivalry between England and Australia that dates back almost 150 years in terms of the Ashes, that it taps into patriotism, but that is also rather fraught and difficult. He then goes on to talk about lots of other sports events that have also seen quite a lot of more unruly crowds, like the Ryder Cup that we were talking about earlier this year. It took place in New York in September, and that was very unruly. There were lots of insults and even expletives and beer that was thrown at some of the European golfers. So it's kind of cricket, golf, even tennis that is seeing this more unsociable behaviour. Bit of a metaphor for our divided times is what Adam calls it. And he speaks to a number of really interesting researchers in this field. Daniel Won, who's at Murray State University, who's been looking at sports psychology for decades. He says it's very difficult to track the ways that behaviour is getting worse, but he does say that changing standards of empathy and just civility in public life means that this kind of antisocial behaviour is on the rise. And Christina Philippou over at Portsmouth University saying that perhaps this is behind the very quickly, rapidly expanding popularity of some of the women's sports teams because they're focused on inclusive and sort of safe fan experiences. I just thought it was a really nice, thoughtful piece from Bloomberg's Adam Blenford about the cricket and the culture, I guess, in sports. I'm going to put a link to it in our show notes. Now, stocks are poised for their worst week in 7 months. It looks like the MSCI All Country World Index down almost 3% this week. Joining us now is Bloomberg's markets reporter Valerie Teitel. To put it into context for us, I mean, this is basically since the big announcement on tariffs from President Trump. What happened yesterday? Because there's been a lot affecting markets.
Look, what happened yesterday essentially is a session that is going to put hair on some young traders' chests. We had a 4% slide in the NASDAQ in an hour and 40 minutes, Caroline. I mean, you don't see steep reversals like this very often. It was one of the biggest intraday swings we've seen in the NASDAQ since COVID, the second biggest since the price fluctuations we saw back in April 2020. We even saw stocks, obviously NVIDIA, the reversal in NVIDIA was leading that, but we also saw big reversals in some other chip names. AMD was down 8% by the end of the session. Micron was down 11%. Only 12 stocks in the NASDAQ yesterday ended in the green. The remainder were in the red, and what could be seen as quite a pivotal session for how this market is viewing AI valuations. That beat from NVIDIA didn't last long when it came to that boost it gave to global equity markets. There was also a steep decline in Bitcoin. Bitcoin dropped 5% in yesterday's session. It's declining again today, Caroline. And listen to this statistic. Bitcoin has now made a new low for 11 straight days. That's something we have never seen in the world's largest cryptocurrency.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. From the dizzying heights of $126,000 down to 85. Goodness. And also you do see the tech-heavy sell-off is continuing today in Asia with names like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. So that kind of concern about the AI story continuing. There was also payrolls data out yesterday, and there's also now been some extra commentary from the Federal Reserve, from Fed officials, and the consensus really seems to be very, very frayed.
Yeah, it does seem like the Fed is fracturing on how they're communicating about their December decision. We had hawks and doves in yesterday's session, all speaking after the September non-farm payroll report showed that unemployment rose for the third straight month to 4.4%. But there was an increase when it came to job gains above economists' expectations. But we did hear from Goolsbee saying he was uneasy about cutting in December. We heard from Barr. He was flagging inflation concerns. And then on the more dovish side, we heard from Fed Governor Lisa Cook. She's saying she's keeping a close eye on private credit, and she warned about asset valuations. We also heard from Stephen Myron, one of the vocal doves on the committee, saying the Fed should be moving towards neutral. And then we heard from Paulson, who is a voter next year in 2026. She was actually talking about the September job release, saying that the job gains were actually in acyclical sectors such as healthcare, and that normally is a precursor to a slowdown. So it does seem like yesterday there was a lot to talk about, both when it comes to the Fed speak that we got and also trying to understand what this September jobs release means in the way forward. I think at the end of the day, there was more focus on the marketed rise in unemployment over the last 3 months than there was on the headline beat on non-farms. But the market is still really penciling in December as a coin flip. We're pricing in around 35% odds that the Fed does reduce rates in December. But Caroline, I have to say, I have not seen a Fed as fractured like this in a long time. Either which way they go, we could see up to 4 to 5 dissents on either side of the table.
Yeah, that is very interesting, isn't it? That's what's happening. Right, let's see how the session then plays out for the rest of the day and going into Europe. Valerie Teitel, our markets reporter, many thanks, with Euro Stoxx 50 futures currently down by 1.4%. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, let's think about what is happening in Japan. The Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and her cabinet have approved the largest round of extra spending since the pandemic, a stimulus package worth $112 billion. Joining us now is Bloomberg's North Asia senior editor Brian Fowler in Tokyo. Brian, good morning. Thanks for being with us. What does this package say, do you think, about the new Prime Minister's economic priorities?
Well, first I would say, just by way of background, Takaichi's ruling LDP sustained two key election setbacks in the last 13 months, losing majorities first in the lower house and then in the upper house in last July. And the main factor behind that was smoldering frustration among consumers about 3 years of inflation. And those years of inflation are coming after 2 decades when we saw prices falling steadily. So people here just were not really happy about seeing prices rise by roughly 2.5% to 3% consistently.
Yeah.
So that's why we've got a lot of subsidies in the package, and there's subsidies to offset natural gas and electricity prices, and they're going to cut the gasoline tax, and there's also going to be allowances for kids. The other thing I would say, just on defense, Takaichi is a conservative in the mold of Shinzo Abe. So early on, even before she met Trump for the first time, she already said that she would move forward by 2 years the goal of raising defense spending to 2% of GDP to this year. So the package really is meant, on one hand, to pacify households and hopefully maybe boost the LDP's chances in the next election, whenever that happens. And it's also meant to boost defense capabilities.
Indeed. Markets have been worried that Takaichi would run a kind of government with looser purse strings, keep pressure on the yen, and there's also been some commentary around the Japanese yen. What are the chances of yen intervention?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. So Finance Minister Katayama said two things today. She said authorities will respond appropriately to excessive moves and that intervention is among options. I would just want to point out that whenever these officials speak, it's never random. MOF officials, first thing in the morning, get together and they decide what the message is going to be to convey whatever degree of alarm they might have. And this goes back decades. And so she's sending a message there that's very purposeful. And it's the first time she's referenced the possibility of intervention. So it's definitely coming kind of within, somewhere on the horizon. The last time authorities here intervened was July 2024, and that was when the yen pushed past 160 yen to the dollar. So we may be a little bit short of that point at this point. But the other thing I would just point out is one of those rounds of intervention occurred late on a Friday night as Japan was headed into a 3-day weekend. And today is Friday, and we're going into a 3-day weekend. So Make of that what you will.
Yeah, Monday holiday in Japan. I also want to ask you a question about why there is money in this budget specifically for bears. And I don't mean the kind of financial kind. I mean actual black bears. Yeah,
that got our attention as well. Well, bears have been very much in the news in recent months. So far, in the first 6 months of the year, there have been more than 100 attacks, people injured or even killed in some cases by bears, which is on pace for a record. This is after years in which we've seen the populations of brown bears and black bears both climbing. Apparently, black bears or brown bears now have doubled to 12,000. Black bears have reached something like 42,000, according to government report. And we're also seeing apparently acorn harvests are not doing so well. So bears are encroaching on places where they run into humans, and it's not working out so well. So the Defense Ministry has actually said it's going to become part of the effort to fight back against bears, and whether that means culling them or taking other steps, we wait to see.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.